The country's gross domestic product has experienced a further decline as it dropped to 3.98% in the fourth quarter of 2021 from the 4.03% and 5.01% recorded in the third and second quarters of last year, respectively. However, the figure is indicative of a continuous positive growth if compared to the 0.11% and 0.51% recorded in the fourth quarter 2020 and second or first quarter of last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the Statistician General of Federation, Simon Harry, during a press briefing last Thursday noted that the new figure, though lower than the 4.03% growth rate in third quarter, was better when viewed in terms of the base effect of the corresponding period in the fourth quarter of 2020. So according to Harry, the improvement seen in the output growth in the last 5 quarters is a steady progress made in stemming the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated negative impact on livelihood, well-being, and the economy. But is Nigeria fully out of the woods yet? That's the big question. So let's get talking now, shall we? Dr. Moda Yusuf is CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPP. He joins us via the telephone now. Thank you for joining us, Doctor. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Nigeria's GDP for fourth quarter beat analyst expectations, expanding by 3.98%. Well, if you look at this, the CBN had estimated that the GDP will grow by 3.1%, whilst the IMF projected that the GDP will also grow by 2.6%. If you factor these together. So what are your views concerning this?
Yeah, thank you very much. There are quite a number of factors. First, the growth numbers, both for the full year was 3.4%.
Right.
The Q4 was 3.98%, which is almost 4% anyway. And the key drivers of this growth, one, that's what you call a very strong base effect. Because the numbers that is being reported is a year-on-year number. Year 2020 is the base year. 2021 is the year for which the reporting is being made. So when you compare year 2020 to 2021, obviously there's been a remarkable improvement. Because in year 2020, practically all sectors were on lockdown. Practically all sectors experienced contraction, except ICT, agric, and financial services. All other sectors recorded negative growth in 2020 because of the pandemic. And the contraction was worse in the second quarter of 2020, where we recorded a contraction of 6.1%. So full year, there was a contraction of 1.92% in 2020. So in 2021, some of the challenges that the economy witnessed in 2020 were already abating. So that is why we talk about very strong base effect. Oil price also recovered in 2020. I mean in 2021. In 2020, average oil price was $42 per barrel. In 2021, it was $70 per barrel average. That also impacted on the growth that has been recorded. Then many of the sectors that were on lockdown have come back into business. The supply chain disruptions had abated. Restrictions on movement has been restricted. A lot of entertainment and parties and hospitality and all of those things have recovered. Aviation has also recovered. So all those restrictions and the setbacks and the shocks that the economy experienced in 2020 were relaxed in 2021. That was also a major factor. Then we had the Economic Sustainability Plan. The total value of that plan was about 2.3 trillion naira. I'm not in a position to see that whether all this was expended, but clearly there was some injection of liquidity in order to mitigate the impact of the recession. So all of these factors were the factors that contributed to this improvement that we have seen, improvement of 3.4%
Because I was going to ask if this makes
yes.
any
Go
difference.
ahead.
I was going to ask if this makes any difference. Does it make any difference? The fact that it will have a 3.4% full year growth and a 3.9% below the third quarter of 2021.
Yes, we see for the citizen, particularly the average Nigerian, and for businesses, and particularly the small businesses, we need to generate a nexus between the GDP numbers, the poverty situation, the issue of economic inclusion, the recovery of small businesses, and the issue of job creation. Because at the end of the day, the GDP is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And the end that the people want to see is the impact on poverty, on jobs and economic inclusion, and reduction in inequality. Unfortunately, on the score of these parameters, the economy cannot be said to have done well, even in the last 1 or 2 years, because the poverty situation seems to have worsened, the job situation has not improved, and many SMEs are struggling to survive. One, because there was a devastating inflationary pressure. Prices went haywire, and this eroded massively the purchasing power of the citizens. If there's any factor that has aggravated poverty in the last 1 to 2 years, it's inflation. Because the income that people had cannot buy much anymore. Even though inflation official figures were 15.6%. But in reality, if you look at the basket of goods that the average person consumes, if you look at the price situation in the last 1 to 2 years, some of those prices have doubled. And if prices double, we are talking about 100% inflation. Some of those prices have gone up by almost 50%. And you can imagine the impact of that on the citizens. Some who don't even have jobs at all. Some whose salaries have not increased. Some who are living on fixed income like the pensioners and so on and so forth. This is why there is so much hue and cry in the economy. Because if you go out there now and do a survey and talk to people that the economy is improving, they will they wonder what you are talking about. Because as far as they are concerned, their condition has not improved. If anything, it has even worsened. The same thing with the currency.
Okay, let me quickly come in, Doctor.
The situation also added to the problem that people are complaining about.
I just want us to, I just want to address this point quickly because, like you just said now, that these two realities, I mean, it's true that we're having a recovery in the growth of the economy. The fact that the economy has grown for the past, recorded a positive trend for the past 3 quarters now. Why the reality is that, yes, there is no money in the pocket of ordinary Nigerian. What is missing here? Because we can't marry these two figures or these two conditions or scenarios together. What do you think is missing and how do we fix it?
You see, what is missing, first is that the economy is not growing inclusively. Because it is one thing for the economy to be posting some of these numbers. It's another thing for it to have the impact. First, if you look at just like the agricultural sector, productivity in that sector is still extremely weak. Very little mechanization, very little application of technology. So there's an issue of productivity. If you look at that sector, especially at the primary level, farming is still being done with hoes and cutlass. Those that are doing fairly well in that chain are those who are possibly in the transportation or in the processing chain. But those who are in the primary level, they are not getting much. Secondly, is the way we manage the macroeconomic environment. If you don't manage the macroeconomic environment well, the little income that people have will be massively eroded. And that is what is playing out in the inflation that we have. That is what is playing out in the currency depreciation. Because, money supply has been increasing, deficit has been growing, debt service commitment has been growing, and more importantly, the CBN financing of deficit. The more the CBN finances deficit, the more inflationary environment we create. Because CBN financing is highly inflationary. Unfortunately, the CBN financing is the cheapest access. It's the low-hanging fruit as far as financing is concerned. If the government has a challenge, it's a question of just calling on the CBN. Even before you finish the process of borrowing either domestically or externally, it's very easy to access CBN funds. And that has been contributing to this. So we need to manage the macroeconomic well, both from the monetary and from the fiscal side, so that you don't weaken the purchasing power of people. So it is essentially a macroeconomic thing.
Okay.
Then the currency depreciation is also taking a huge toll on businesses across all sectors. Again, the way you manage your foreign exchange market is also playing out here. We are not managing it well. That is why we are having this kind of distortions and galloping exchange rates.
Now we have it, of course, now we have the GDP figure for 2021. Inflation figure for the month of January was 15.60%. These are two figures or indicators, economic indicators that analysts are saying, look, that the CBN, MPC, the next MPC meeting, we should be able to see how CBN will play with these figures. First, the question is, how do you think the CBN can play with this figure, work on this figure in their next MPC meeting? Then the second question will be that, is Nigeria out of the woods yet, given the fact that we have seen the growth of the economy sustained for 3 consecutive quarters?
You see, for the MPC, there's very little the MPC can do to deal with this situation. Because it's not a question of whether the monetary policy is tight or whether there's monetary policy accommodation and all of that. It's a question of the way we manage the totality of the macroeconomic environment. Already, the monetary environment is tight because you have the CRR, which is cash reserve requirement of 27.5%. It's one of the highest you can get anywhere in the world. And on top of that, there are some occasional direct debits that come from the central bank, which has put the CRR effectively for some banks at over 50%. So the banking system have been squeezed already. And perhaps, I don't know how much more you can squeeze them. If you want, and if you say you are adjusting the MPR adjustment has not been known to traditionally have any significant effect on the macroeconomic environment.
Are you saying the CBN is not keeping to his, because the last parameters, if you look at some of the parameters, the cash reserve ratio was maintained at 27.5%, vis-a-vis other parameters. Are you saying that the CBN is not keeping to that, or is there any on the ground or behind the same charges?
Well, it's not a question of behind the same charges. If you talk to the industry players in the banking system, they will tell you that effective CRR, that is their money that is the CBN as a ratio of their deposit, most of them is far, far above the 27.5%. Effective CRR for many of them is 50% and above. That is what the industry players are saying. So if you already have that situation, how much more can you tighten them? The other option is for the CBN to increase MPR. MPR okay, 11.5%, if you increase to 12, that may not have any material effect. What we need to do, I think we need to deal with both the demand and the supply side issues, and also the macroeconomic issues. We should start, even from the monetary side, the rate at which the CBN financing deficit has to go down drastically, because there is a provision in the CBN Act that you should not give finance deficit more than 5% of the revenue of the previous year, actual revenue. If you look at the level of CBN financing of deficit now, it's anywhere between 40 to 50%, which in itself is also inconsistent with the provision of the CBN Act. But more importantly, is inflationary implication of resorting to the CBN.
All right.
It's looking more like what you had in the days of Idi Amin, when there's no money, you tell the CBN governor to go and print more money. That is the kind of scenario. And it is the citizens that are paying for it in form of high inflation. In some literature, such financing is even regarded as inflation tax.
I think
So
these are key issues.
Productivity supply. Yeah, let me listen to you.
Okay, Doctor, these are key issues, of course, you've put on the table, and we'll keep our eyes. Probably we'll bring you on the show again to talk more on that particular area. But just before we go, give us your take now. Is Nigeria's economy out of the woods yet? And given the fact that you painted earlier, how soon do we begin to see these figures reflect in the real economy?
Well, we are partially getting out of it. At least we had a recession in 2021. We had a contraction in 2020. We are now reporting a growth of 3.4 in 2021. That is positive. But we need to address these critical issues. Therefore, we need to address productivity issues. We need to address insecurity issues affecting the agri sector. We need to address issues of regulation. We need to address issues of creating an enabling environment for small business, because of the critical role they play in employment generation and even in promoting economic inclusion. And we need to moderate money supply, especially CBN financing of fiscal deficit. We need to watch the way watch the rate at which we are borrowing, because the borrowing situation is creating a lot of macroeconomic problems. High deficit, high inflation, high debt service, and also linking to exchange rate depreciation. These are some of the consequences when you are spending more than you have the capacity to generate revenue to support. Now the government has sent a supplementary budget of 2.5 trillion to the National Assembly. By the time you add 2.5 trillion to 17 trillion, you are getting close to 20 trillion. Where is the revenue to support it? That is why the MDAs are being harassed to go and be looking for money. And before you know it, they'll be bouncing on all the private sector players because they want to generate revenue. Nobody's talking about how to cut down the cost of governance. These are some of the fundamental things we need to deal with.